Welcome to the Scifi and Fantasy Show's Mining the Genre Asteroid, our podcast adaptation of Paul's long-running feature for our blog. This is episode number 3 of a show where older overlooked genre gems are dug up and discussed anew. If you guys could rework this so that there are more tongue twisters, I'd appreciate it, especially more alliteration.
I think this is Daniel's fault, not ours. Anyway, but how do you know she's a witch?
Well, she looks like one.
Red hair.
She turned me into a newt!
She's a ginger, you know? She's, wicked.
I got
It's
better. No, nobody else is getting come on, Paul.
I get it.
I get it.
I'm not quite sure what to follow it up with. I mean, that's the end of a line. I got better. That ends that skit.
That's the end of the bit.
No, it's not.
Yeah, there's no more after that bit.
No, it's not.
I guess we can say, burner! Burner!
No, or it's like, we'll use our larder scales because she must weigh as much as a wooden duck if she's a witch.
She weighs as much as a duck, then she's a witch!
She's a witch.
Weigh her!
We'll use our larder scales, and of course, you know, Sir Bedivere's scales are rigged.
Yes,
which is
they
hilarious.
are. Very fun. Well, I'm Shaun.
I'm Trish.
And I'm Paul.
And on today's show, we'll discuss 1977's Diadem from the Stars by Joe Clayton, the first book of the Diadem Decalogy.
What's a decalogy, Shaun?
I assume it's a thing with 9.
It's actually just 9 books in the Diadem series, and then there's one book about one of the side characters and a trilogy about a different side character.
So you're saying it's not a decalogy at all?
No, sorry. It is a long-running series, though.
I don't know. I feel like the Diadem Saga is a...
Yeah, sure. The Diadem Saga.
Diadem Cinematic Universe?
The Diadem series. Anyway,
Diadem
before we get any further into that discussion, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us about our show at scifiandfantasy.com/listener suggestions. They might get discussed right here on our future shows. If you aren't there already, please join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 6:30 p.m. 6:30 p.m. Central until the end of June. After that, 7 p.m. Central. To be a part of our...
And then it's always 7 for me.
Right,
okay.
So 7 p.m. Central.
You see why this is confusing and I didn't like it?
Yes.
Should I just do that paragraph again for a podcast?
No, don't bother.
Okay.
It's fine.
Anyway, come be a part of our interactive live streaming format. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord. It only takes $1 a month, although you can, of course, give us more if you want.
I mean, that's even cheaper deal than Sally Struthers back in the 80s. Anyway,
wow,
please
Paul.
tell folks about this show and review us on iTunes, Podcatcher, Good Pods, and all the other places that you can review podcasts. They come, they grow, they die. I don't even know which ones are out anymore. Anyway, word of mouth is a big deal for fan-run podcasts, and we need your help. Yes, your help to find new ears for our ridiculous show. Also, as of this recording, a new issue of Journey Planet at journeyplanet.org has dropped that has me as a guest editor and has our own Trippity Mats, Trish, having contributed a poem and an essay to it. Yes, this is about the Hugos. Yes, Dave McCarty can still die in a fire.
The issue is called Be the Change, and you can find it at journeyplanet.org.
Excellent. Well.
And there's also a dozen other people writing about
That's true.
how to make things better with the Hugos.
One
So
of them
check
is
it out.
put me in control. I will make the decisions. There will be no arguments or complaints. Everything will happen according to my will.
So you're going for the Plato Philosopher King approach? Okay.
Well, given a dictatorship by by Shaun or dictatorship by the former dictator, I know who I'm voting for.
To be fair, I actually would make good choices mostly. And if I made bad choices, it'd be by accident. Just saying.
All your good things are intentional, all your bad things are by accident.
I mean,
Shaun, I notice I'm clipping a bit, so I'm going to turn down my gain a little.
Okie dokie.
Okay. You can still hear me, though, right?
Yep, you're good.
Okay.
Perfect. Good. Okay, well, Paul, it is now your task to give us the absolutely accurate, perfect summary of this book. If you say one name wrong, I'm putting you in timeout.
Oh boy, I'm gonna go in timeout right up the bat. Anyway, Diadem from the Stars is a science fantasy novel, the first in the series by Joe Clayton. Our main character is Lita, or Litis. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce her full regular name. Words are hard. Lita has some interesting, uncontrolled, burgeoning psionic powers, and so in this mountain community that we find her in, this lovely valley, she's actually an outcast. She's actually fighting and tangling with the other residents and peers on a pretty regular basis. And eventually, they get sick enough of her that they decide they're going to up and up burn her as a witch. So our heroine goes on the run looking for a spaceship that her mother told about in a note she left her. And so we get a series of adventures as Lita goes across this planet trying to find the spaceship that will take her off the planet and hopefully eventually one day take her to the home planet of her mother, which is a secret planet somewhere in the galaxy that people aren't supposed to know about. But Lita has half of that heritage, and so she might be able to get there. But that book's not about that. This book is about Lita crossing this great expanse of a planet, trying to find an ancient spaceship to hit a button that says basically calls for a space Uber. Eventually she does meet the titular Diadem of the Stars, which came from the stars, and she also meets the thief who was responsible for bringing on this world in the first place, and they finish the adventures trying to find the spaceship so they both can leave the planet and return to galactic civilization. Lots of weird adventures happen along the way. Oh, did I mention this planet has 2 suns and has some very strange mores in the various cultures we run into? I knew you could. Also, there's some odd animals on this planet as well.
There are?
That's the plot.
So we should say, before we get to any specifics about this book, it is very likely we're at least going to mention or talk about, to some degree, the fact that this book contains a significant amount of sexual assault. And so if that is a thing that you are not comfortable with, this is your off-ramp right now, because this book does have quite a bit of it, quite a bit by, I think, what we're used to, I would say. This is not a thing we see very often in the works that we cover. It does happen occasionally, but this is a work where it is perhaps exploring that in a very particular way. And so, yeah, off-ramp has been offered. Take it if you need it.
Right. It's not exactly cheering on the assaults. It's presenting it as a brutal world, brutal to women, where unpleasant stuff happens to them a lot. Yeah,
I mean, I would give as an example, there is a character who repeatedly calls a woman the B word. And it doesn't get much better in terms of his treatment of women from that point. He is not a nice man. He is a very not nice man, and we are not meant to like him. Yeah. Anyway, so where do we want to start?
Mention why we're talking about this book. One of our Patreon supporters suggested it, and that is the thing you can do if you're a Patreon. Well, really, anybody can suggest Mining the Genre Asteroid stuff for us to go back and cover. We like to, Mining the Genre Asteroid, basically we do works through the history of science fiction up up until 1980 or so, and we mostly are talking about forgotten authors or authors who never were very famous. Jo Clayton was quite famous in her time. She wrote over 35 novels and sold a total of 1.25 million, which is great stuff, but I certainly don't see her talked about much these days. Partly because her work was of her time, and it's some of her work has pretty difficult entry ramps, as just mentioned. But she also wrote a lot of female protagonists, which were rare at the time, and she also writes about important themes like corporate tyrannies over entire planets, and she has a lot of interesting alien races and technologies and stuff. She's a lot of fun to read a lot of the time. Some of the stuff is not so fun, but we can get more into that later. But she's definitely an important writer that is worth revisiting.
I agree.
And so here we are.
It's some other background stuff, I guess, before the specifics of the book worth mentioning. Fonts in Use actually covers the book cover for this, which I'm going to bring up because I'm a bit of a font nerd. I'm always curious about the fonts that they use on book covers. Obviously, you have the actual old edition of the book, which is lovely. There is a newer edition.
Isn't that a Michael Whelan cover?
It is. It is a Michael Whelan cover from obviously from 1977, and that is reprinted on an old 1980s edition of the book, which Trish may or may not have the 80s version. I'm not sure. And then that is not used on more recent ones, which I think is more of a stylistic concern. But if you're curious about typography, the book cover from those versions that Trish was kindly holding up in the video for us features the Wexford Ultra Bold font by Richard Slatter. That font was made in 1972. So, there you go.
Oh, there's the sequel.
There's the second book. Yeah, there's another one. Yeah, so there's a whole series of... Okay, well, Trish is just teasing us now about having the whole series.
Maeve, a novel of the Diadem. Trish has a bunch of these.
Trish might be ridiculous.
The Nowhere.
It's almost like Trish might be interested in Jo Clayton. I don't know. What would give that
The
idea?
Snares of Ibex, a novel of the Diadem.
A couple of years ago when I was moving, I sat down to reread this series because I was planning to get rid of it, but I just couldn't do it. And so I didn't. And so I moved this set of... out of the 13 books, I only have 11 of them. Wow. I just could not stand to get rid of them.
Shadow of the War Master.
Excellent. There's so many. Oh my god. Oh, that one's actually kind of thick.
Shadowplay.
I don't like that cover very much. That's not a great cover. What's that one? Another thick one?
Shadow
Another
Spear.
Thick one. Yes.
Nice.
Her books definitely got thicker as she went along.
This is a good reminder for anyone who
Shadow
listens to the podcast. These are on YouTube as video, so you can actually see all of the book covers that Trish has decided to hold up for us.
We appreciate this.
Yeah.
Listeners, I had no idea when someone remember who in the Discord suggested this book. I had no idea that Trish was so tied into this series. Not a clue. It is one of those happy coincidences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that, in talking about Jo Clayton, I've heard the name. I don't have anything from this particular series, but I have another Jo Clayton book in a box somewhere because they're all packed. But in trying to look, every time we do one of these, I've been looking at the authors to see, is there any academic work? Because that can sometimes be a good measure of maybe they weren't popular in fandom, but their work is well valued. So it's sort of like if you look at Le Guin, right, The Dispossessed is a great book, but it is not as well loved in fandom as it is by academics. Academics love The Dispossessed, but fandom is going to talk about Earthsea and Left Hand of Darkness and so on and so forth. So I thought, okay, let's look. And there really isn't a lot on Jo Clayton. There are some references to her work in a few academic books, but they're not about her work. They're sort of brief discussions. I didn't really check articles, but they didn't come up in my Google Scholar search. So there really isn't a lot, and especially about this series, despite the fact that it is, I think, pretty clear this is probably her most important sequence of novels, which is this 9, the Dexology. And it's kind of...
Non-ology. Decology would be 10.
Not whatever. I didn't write
her
it, Paul.
Triskaidekology. Yes.
You know what?
It's certainly her longest series, even
Yeah.
if you just take the basic series of 9.
Yeah, so I just think it's interesting, certainly some of the measures we can take of like whether or not an author is important is to look at how a certain community within the science fiction world views that author. And so when we've done this, some of the other authors haven't been in a lot of stuff, but they're at least mentioned a bit more. And Clayton is weirdly not really mentioned, except in a couple of books about women authors.
That general erasure of women from science fiction history.
Well, it's kind of weird, right? Because she published 30-something novels, right?
And sold
in her
1 million
time,
books. It's like, that's not chump change.
Yeah, over 1.25 million books. That's a lot of books, right? And
that's a lot of books. That's a lot of books and a lot of readers.
So it's kind of strange that something is sold. She sold as many books as she has, and yet is not really discussed. And yet, if you think of other authors who have sold a lot of books, we discuss them like endlessly. We don't shut up about them, even when they're not very good. It's kind of weird. I don't understand it. You'd think that this is the author, like when people are talking about, where are all the women authors from yesteryear? And it's like, well, here's Joe Clayton doing stuff that, men have been doing in much more titillating ways than this book presents it as, because this book does not present the poor treatment and the horrific treatment of women and their bodies. It does not treat that as titillation, as morally bad, but isn't it kind of hot? Which is what some of the barbarian style novels from the 40s, 50s, even earlier are doing. This is presented the opposite. It's a story of a barbaric world, quote unquote barbaric world, or savage world, or whatever language you want to use, where these are very distinctly horrific acts. And then you throw in things that we'll see Butler do later, where we've got empaths and psychic abilities, where that gets even more horrific, because there's now other layers of trauma on top of it. And then characters in this story who are subjected to this are living in a world that it doesn't have the privileges of living in a world that has more resources. So they have to work through the trauma, not just the kind of dark trauma I'm talking now, but all traumas. They have to figure out how to work through it on more or less on their own. They're just kind of thrown to the wolves, as it were. Right. And that's kind of going with the setting, right? It's a setting where horrific things happen and the world isn't going to be nice to you because you're traumatized. You have to basically get over it as much as you can, which is interesting to see done, but done in a way that is not romanticizing it, which I appreciated a lot. I did not feel romanticism. I felt uncomfortable at many points in the book.
Right. And there is in general, there's, especially for the times they go, in addition to the sexual, there's a whole lot of sex in this book. I mean, some of it is relatively, there's sexual stuff, but there's also a lot of casualness, especially in Lita's initial society about sex. There's hookups everywhere. And it's just really? I was it was eye-blinking. It's just they kind of treat it very differently than our own. It was an interesting cultural anthropology into seeing Lita's Mountain Valley society and how they treat relationships and treat sex. And
yeah. However, everywhere in her original culture and across this world, well, except for one group of people that I can think of, it's all patriarchal. Different forms of patriarchy, but it's always where men at least have the power hand, if not absolute control over women's lives. And
sometimes with the women joyfully like being part of that power structure and reinforcing that patriarchy.
Right, as often happens in patriarchy, you take your power where you can find it, even if that exists through shoring up the men.
Shoring up the men and hurting your sisters, as it were.
Yeah, and Shaun, I think one reason there probably isn't a whole lot of academic attention on these books is that there is not a lot of outright philosophizing the way that there is in many of Le Guin's books. You know, people don't talk about systems of power and economic structures or anything like that. However, Clayton, throughout this series and through other books of her, she really goes hard on some issues. A lot of her books cover corporate planets, company planets, like company towns, and the way that they exploit and abuse and rape the worlds that they are taking over, regardless of the inhabitants' wishes. There's also a fair number of cases where religions are portrayed, not all negatively, because this is science fantasy, and the fantasy does not just consist of psionics, which was more seen as a science-y kind of thing back in the 70s and 80s and into the 80s, I guess. But also, planets have kind of guardian spirits, and empaths can feel each other's powers or feel each other's emotions, and our main character Elitas can call healing from a black river that she pictures in her mind. So there's magic, and a lot of local inhabitants have religions that are valid where they are, but also there are religious structures that are incredibly oppressive and evil. So,
just a smidge.
Jo talks about, she depicts through action, mostly, a lot of serious issues. But she doesn't spend pages philosophizing about it, and I think the fact that most of the things that happen through action and not through dialogue about structures makes people take her less seriously. But she is absolutely addressing important topics in her books.
I mean, yeah, I don't want us to at all suggest that maybe Clayton isn't interested in some of these different
issues.
themes, like these issues. It's the way that she's exploring them, I think, is incredibly dependent in this book on the setting, because this is a setting that historically we do not associate with an exploration of these concerns. It is typically when you think of these this is like, thinking of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and like it has that setting that we think of so many pulps, like even in the same era.
Sword and Planet.
Right, we've got like the Gore novels floating around at this point, which are risible. Right.
Did we have to talk about Gore?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning because like this is the same era when we start getting movies that are about like these settings where you've got, like Tarzan, Conan types running around like grabbing women from vines and all kinds of things in these sort of titillating stories about savagery. And what Clayton doesn't do is sort of like I said before, like romanticize these ideas, but instead presents them to us with all their warts very clearly laid out, so that what we have to do is like think about what it is to live in a world where you have, like Trish was pointing out, a bunch of different religious structures, some of which think of Elitas, our main character, as something to be feared, because they know that she has some sort of ability, and as it begins to appear, they begin to wonder, maybe we need to do something to stop her, right? And there's a reason why, like, the beginning of this book it says Fireball at the very beginning of the book, because like that's how she's here. Her like family originally came from another world and like crash landed on this place, and then now someone else has crash landed, and there's this fireball in the sky, and here are these people who aren't spacefaring people being, doing what you would expect of people, very deeply afraid and superstitious about things they frankly don't understand, and in some respects have a little bit of good reason to be terrified of, because this flying spaceship thing's scary. Just saying. So,
but they know it. But they kind of know enough. I found that interesting. The word building. They know enough of that. It is a spaceship falling to people come from the stars. They kind of they. I don't know, Trish, maybe you can tell me if we find out more about how this planet got settled or why. It's like, was it like some ancient culture that regressed? Is this the whole idea of humans just growing up on different worlds or what? But
planets are almost without number. Settled planets are almost without number in the galaxy. There are many. There is a whole university planet that is just universities, and people come from across the galaxy to study there. Of course, places have their own universities on their own worlds too, but that gives you an idea of the size and scope of this universe.
And
so a lot of places get settled. This place is resource poor. It doesn't have stuff to mine. It's just not an interesting planet, and so obviously it got settled as a mainly agricultural planet, and people just don't have much reason to visit that place. But there are many other planets that are rich and lush and highly developed.
I see. I mean, because this kind of, because I was wondering if it's like colony that regressed. I was kind of thinking of Christopher Stasheff's The Warlock series, where you have a whole bunch of planets of various technological levels, and a character from a high technological civilization finds himself on a backward planet, and they all think, I know this is kind of your deal going about comps, so I'm going comps right away. Sorry, Trish. They all think he's a wizard, and he's like, I am not a wizard or a warlock. That's crazy. I'm from the stars. I am a man of science. You can't call me a warlock. That's stupid.
Or go to Adrian Tchaikovsky's Elder Race, where there's an anthropologist that everyone thinks is a warlock, and when he says, I'm not a wizard, the translator translate that to, I'm an anthropologist, I'm not a wizard, and he said, it gets translated as, I'm not a wizard, I'm a wizard. Right. I mean, in one way, I would think, Paul, that this would be your jam because it's very much science and fantasy. Mm-hmm. The whole series explores ideas of science and fantasy, and sometimes people from more civilized places try to play tricks on people who are from less, developed worlds. Sometimes they get taken unawares because they're in this universe, there is actual magic that does exist.
Magic is real.
Can I ask Trish to do me a favor real quick?
Yep.
Can you get your copy of the book and look usually at the back where they have other DAW books you can buy, and I'd like to know what's there.
Yep. DAW books, the Saga of Elitis. Have you discovered DAW's new rising star, Sharon Green? The Tyrillian novels, lists 3. Jalov, Amazon Warrior, lists 3 books.
Okay.
DAW, A Galaxy of Science Fiction Stars, Timothy Zahn, Edward Llewellyn, Philip Boyer, A. Van Vogt, Marion Zimmer Bradley, 10 other people.
Okay.
Let's see. DAW Collectors. Many readers of DAW books have written requesting information on early titles and book numbers. To assist in the collection of DAW adventures, we've prepared a several pages thing. Okay, a whole page about Philip K. Dick. Right, okay, so the whole page of Philip K. Dick came
Wow.
right after the end of the book, which seems like an odd choice, but
That is a very odd choice.
Weird. So apparently one of the editions of the book, so it must be the other one. So you either have the 70s one or you have the 80s version. But James Davis Nichol has written a review of this book, and in his footnote, he mentions that in the back of his version, they have a bunch of suggestions of basically books that they think you would like. And I don't know how exactly it's presented. Essentially books you would like based on, the book itself, right? Oh, what does that say? I can't see it. 1970, does it say 77?
yeah, copyright 1977, all rights reserved, cover art by Michael Whelan, first printing March 1977.
So this must be the 80s version. So what he says is that there's at the back a list of books that either are presented as actual appeals to Diadem readers or just as a consequence of being in the book. And in there are actually the John Norman Gore books mentioned.
Oh,
yeah. And so it is very strange because there are other authors that make some interesting sense. So E.C. Tubb is mentioned, Norton, I'm not sure which Lee, I'm guessing Sharon Lee. And then
Tanith Lee, probably.
Or
Tanith Lee.
It's
too early for Sharon
Viz,
Lee.
I think, probably is mentioned. And then I'm not sure which Bradley he's referring to, but
probably
Marion Zimmer Bradley,
Zimmer
probably.
Bradley.
Yeah. But his question is, why would you be recommending the Gore books? And I'm sitting here going, yeah, because they have very different philosophies about those themes.
It's superficially similar things happen, but the tones are
Very different.
different.
Completely different. They're
Yeah.
different keys entirely. You know who would actually be an interesting pairing with this would be Julian May. You're not traveling in space; you're traveling in time.
Huh.
You're sending people from a technological future into the deep past and into a science fantasy setting with the aliens there.
Well, yeah, that'd be an interesting pairing. Yeah. I mean, the other would be someone we actually just covered, or you guys were. I was just in chat being friendly, but the Susan McKee Charnas book would be another. That series as well has some very similar theming, just very different perspectives. Could be an interesting comparison.
That book is even more harsh on the patriarchy patriarchy than this book.
It's interesting that we've had
that
two books that are
philosophical.
incredibly feminist, and then one that you wouldn't have suspected was feminist, and yet Schultz apparently was like, yeah, women awesome. Which I find very interesting that we have gotten two very much feminist science fiction works, and one that I don't think in any way was marketed as feminist, but it could be argued as feminist. This is not intended, I think. Mining the Genre Asteroid Feminist Edition is not really where we go.
I wasn't
but
quite
it
going
is
for
curious.
that, but we have a boomlet of feminist science fiction at the moment.
That
friends.
leads me to a question for both of you that maybe you two could talk about a little bit better than I can, because I don't feel like I have the breadth of book knowledge, but sort of two sides of this. One is me making this joke is leading me to this question, which is this is the 60s, 70s new wave, which I know a little bit about. We do get a lot of feminist SF at this period. But then Trish had mentioned much earlier, right, the treatment of psionics as being science ? And yet in this story, magic is a thing
real.
That exists. And so the concept of the psionic as being purely science-y is already kind of in question. And so I was kind of curious, I realize it's a big question, from your perspectives, where this kind of sits in the kind of trends on those two themes, maybe starting feminist, and then we can backtrack to the psionics, because my psionic knowledge is just William Shatner Tech War, which I don't actually think has psionics in it, but
no.
But it just, that's what it made me think
I will say, in these books, psionics is something that comes more often with bloodlines, and with certain tribes. It's not just sprinkled randomly among humans. It's something that will show up occasionally with certain people, and can be developed through breeding programs or whatever.
Okay.
And so it is science-y in that respect, but then again, you have lots of stories where magic goes through bloodlines too.
Right, that's what I was thinking. It's like hereditary power is very much a fantasy, not a science fiction trope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't think there's anywhere in the books where she says empathy is magic and being good with tech is science. I don't think she clearly defines it as magic or not magic at any point, but she certainly interweaves it with other clearly magical powers, speaking to ghosts or whatever. Or not so much ghosts as spirits, totems, something like that. So I wouldn't say that Clayton clearly defines it, but then again, she's pretty far away from the James H. Smiths where psionics is just a mental power that, can also be replicated through psi machines.
Interesting. Paul, do you have any thoughts on like the trend of psionics in science fiction?
I do.
Yeah, please jump in.
I do. Psionics rose into science fiction with Campbell and the whole Dianetics thing, and science was everywhere for a while. I mean, everywhere from Alfred Bester to James Schmitz. Psionics starts to die off here in the 70s, and I mentioned Julian May before, and Julian May is really the last author I can think of that really mainstream large-scale science fiction author, I'm not counting Tech Wars, that really goes for putting psionics as a science, and with the Golden Torque and Intervention, and basically her whole series of novels, both set in her future and also the ones where they go back to the past. That's like the end of hurrah of psionics. So this is towards that end of taking psionics seriously as something that can be scientifically quantized, and why that is, I guess, since it seems to become clear that psionics isn't really a thing, it kind of lost its impetus in the field. It's interesting that in the Julian May verse, basically, it is also bred, and basically there are aliens who have been watching Earth history and thinking, oh, we're gonna have real psionics appear here and here, because that's where the breeding is. That being Ireland and the Caucasus, to be precise. And as it turns out in our novels, we get lots of psionics who are Irish and lots of psionics who are from Kazakhstan and the Caucasus Mountains, as it turns out. But yeah, so this is kind of towards the tail end of real serious psionics, and by the time you get to 1990, psionics is dead as a doornail. You don't find psionics seriously anymore. If you see psionics at all, it's clearly just mind magic, and there's no science behind it whatsoever, and so it kind of had its day and kind of lost its steam.
I wonder if some of that is just, the experiments and the conversations about it. I was thinking like, was it James Randi from way back when? Right, where he's like debunking so-called, mystics and psychics and people with psychic abilities.
Uri Geller and his idiocy, yes.
Uri Geller, jeez Louise. He's like a parody of himself.
I remember Uri Geller. I remember all that crap.
He was
I think
like a decade, maybe 15 years ago, on a BBC comedy program, and they just tore him to shreds. He was trying to get people to do, like, if everybody just, like, puts a spoon on top of their TV and we all think really hard, it'll bounce on your TVs. And they just tore him a new one. And I was sitting there going, does he know he's a joke? Like, he knows, right? He has to know.
No,
because his whole thing is nonsense. And, like, if you watch old James Randi stuff where he's debunking people, there's seas of these people, like, pretending that they can make pages. Like, it's always useless abilities, right? Like, there's a guy that, like, he would, like, make the page in the phone book flip, right? Like, I can flip pages with my mind. And I'm sitting here going, I get why you were doing this, because it's a thing you found a trick for that you can do to make it do it, because you don't actually have powers. But it's also like, what useless power is this? I could move the page in the phone book so you could see the next page. Woo! Like, come on.
It's not even a level 0 spell in D&D. It's a level -1 spell.
Right?
In
Yeah.
D&D.
It's the thing that you do like when you're 3, and then the Jedi show up and be like, "Oh, you might be force sensitive. We got to test you now." like that's what it is. In this book, though, like they're not minor. Like there's empathy. There's empathic components to this. There's a lot more psychic power involved in it, and I find it interesting that in SF, right, it's not these like super ridiculously basic, essentially useless abilities. They wouldn't even like be janitors in like the X-Men mansion kind of abilities, right? To like, we get people who can like melt your brain, and like, not necessarily in this book, but like, they can use these abilities to do real harm. And I guess a part of it is like a fantastic element, like a fantasy of imagining like, what if we could harness the power of the mind to the extent that we could make what is in our mind come real. Le Guin even has a book about that, where somebody has dreams of like the I forget what the name of the book is, but like the reality keeps changing as a consequence of their delusions. But in the real world, like it doesn't manifest. Like nobody seems to give us real things to pull on, and then you get MK Ultra, where they're obviously experimenting and finding out there's nothing. So I feel like at some point we just go, cool, it was fun watching a dude flip a page with his mind, but like at some point you gotta like, I don't know, make something blow up.
You have to actually have something you can actually pursue, and it's just like, nope, it just doesn't work. And
yeah,
and so science fiction and fantasy kind of gave up on psionics, except for rare things now and again, like what's her name in Firefly clearly is a psionic, but I mean those are very rare these days.
But she's also an experiment, right? Like when we see
she's an experiment, right?
Yeah.
She's an experiment. She's an experiment. She's a created psionic.
I mean, if you think about it, Firefly is doing what MK Ultra was trying to do, like by giving people drugs and hoping that they would like open their mind to the other dimension or whatever.
Open your mind to me, Mr. Quaid. Oh, there's Total Recall. That's 1990. Again, we're at the tail end of psionics as something that you find commonly. It's like, are all psychics freaks? Pretty much, because they're all mutants. But
right, that's kind of what I was thinking, is like, if psionics does appear now, it feels like either it's just like it's like people can read your mind magic nonsense that we'd usually associate with charlatans. Like X-Files does it in like the late 90s a bunch of times, where people have like magic brain power where they could read your mind or read the future or whatever. Or it's like, we've invented it. We found some way to manipulate your genetics and do it.
Or technologically boost it, yeah.
Yeah, or it's there latent, right? The guy who can flip pages out on the phone book, right? We gave him the super shot, and now he can
flip
bend airplanes in half or whatever.
Right, or we invent technology through which you can focus your mental powers and make it work.
Yeah, it's almost like we've taken the magical thing and applied scientific principles to make it real.
But it's not, still even then, that's not a common thing to go with in science fiction. It's like a played out field in science fiction, waiting for some author to really go back at it. But right now, it's kind of like that coal seam doesn't have any minerals in it at the moment.
Yeah, very much so. So I know I've rambled, and I wonder if we could talk about pregnancy, because this book involves it. It's kind of a big deal.
Sure. Oh, yes.
But if you have something else you'd like to take us to, Trish, you're free to. I just thought we could.
I want to talk more about the series in general at the end and do some spoilers, but I'm happy to talk more about this book first. Okay. So yeah, pregnancy. At the beginning, Alitas is having an affair with a musician and gets pregnant by him. And throughout most of the book, she is getting more and more pregnant as her pregnancy is more developing gravid as she goes through her world-spanning trek. And at the end of the book, she gives birth. And so, unusual in science fiction books to have this much emphasis on pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And a whole lot of the next book is about baby in the cradle, as she goes on her next adventure and, constantly having to take time, enjoying taking time to change the baby, feed the baby, sing to the baby, blah, 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 baby. So there's a lot of baby in the next book, too. But that is rather unusual certainly for science fiction books and pretty much for fantasy books, too. Of not just this era. I can't actually think of many SFF books where so much time and attention is spent to a woman's pregnancy and the first year or whatever of babyhood.
Yeah, that's unusual. One weird one that comes to mind is I think it's the second of the Dream Park books where one of the characters gets impregnated with a god baby and wonders if the god baby is going to she's going to give birth to God Baby, and spoiler, no, God Baby decides to stay in the womb. So, and give her his power. I kid you not. I mean, it's Larry Niven. What do you expect?
It doesn't, Barrier, right? By Bujold?
Oh, sure. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Barrier, are you doing replicas? I mean, Trish and I were just at a convention last weekend as a recording that had Lois McMaster Bujold as a guest, and she talked about mirror dancing specific, but of course we talked about uterine replicators and biology, and the fact that Lois pointed out that not a lot of people are writing about this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's why she decided to explore the consequences of uterine replicator technology. Because no one else was doing it, so she felt she had to do it, and how.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of very many examples. I know Midnight Robber and Brown Girl in the Ring both involve. I think Brown Girl in the Ring, if I'm correct,
I don't
has
remember.
Pregnancy. Butler's work. I hate
Blood
calling
Child,
it Lilith's
Blood
Blood,
Child,
so I'm not going to call it Lilith's Blood.
Sure.
I'll call it the Xenogenesis, and whatever relabeling that is, I refuse.
Also, that novella, I think, that we did last year we interviewed the author, and it was a woman in a refugee ship, and she had a child with some sort of oceanic other. I can't think of the name of it.
Flowers
from the Sea?
By Zinni Rockland. Yeah, which is a horror novel. So that was not necessarily nice pregnancy.
I skipped that one.
It was a difficult pregnancy. Yes,
it was very difficult.
But back in '77, gosh, unless it was some kind of novel where there was a dynastic heir thing going on in a feudal state, I can't think of many baby-centric novels.
There really aren't that many from pre-1980 that are where pregnancy is central to the plot of the novel. There's certainly probably tons of examples where people get pregnant, but it doesn't take up the bulk of the book. And so I thought it was very interesting because once you realize Elidis she's essentially becoming an adventurer. She is an adventurer in this book, but she's to become a space adventurer. And it's but normally when we think of adventurers and we think of women as adventurers, we think of them as unattached, right? They may have a man, but maybe not. And if they do, it's a different man, or it's the man they left behind because he's a man baby. But usually you don't have a baby because the conventional space, and I'm not agreeing with this per se, but the conventional space for a woman when a child is involved is with the child. I suppose in a science fiction story, as I imagine the next book, which you mentioned, Trish, deals with, she can just take it with her in the spaceship, and maybe there's robots and things that can help. But like, it's just an interesting shift in focus from where women have to make a choice to choose between the adventure and motherhood, and
Family.
that is out. There is no choice. She just is like, yeah, I'm gonna have a kid on my hip, whatever.
I mean, it's a very traditional patriarchal sort of thing. Like, I suddenly just thought of the Truman Show, and Truman wants to leave the town, go on adventures. It's like, I want to see the world, explore, go on adventures, and his fake TV wife says, "Well, I thought we were going to try for a baby. Isn't that enough for an adventure?" It's like one or the other. It's like ¿Por qué no los dos?
Yeah.
I'm actually reading, what is it? Some Desperate Glory right now. And on this refugee station, Gaia, the soldiers get all the glory, but they toast the nursery where many of the women are sent. And they say, I'd rather stand 3 times on the line of battle than be in the nursery. That's a toast to the mothers there, because on Gaia, 1 in 3 women die in childbirth. So, that's...
that's a horrifying statistic. I mean, our statistics today in the modern world aren't great, but that's even worse.
Right, it's implied there's some genetic problems or something going, or environmental problems or something.
And that you just reminded me of a book. I mean, it's alien pregnancy, but you just reminded me of a book, A World of Difference by Harry Turtledove. Does deal with the aliens getting pregnant. World of Difference, it's an alternate history where all history is the same except the solar system is different, and Mars is larger enough to hold an atmosphere and hold life. It's actually called Minerva in this universe, not Mars, because you can see cloud flashes, you get the Minervan flash. So in the 1980s, the Soviets and the Americans land on the planet and find intelligent aliens. They have radial biology. They're kind of like starfish sort of body plan, but they're intelligent. But women giving birth is often a deadly event. And in the course of the novel, the Americans try to figure out ways to make that less deadly so that women can survive. And that they figure is going to absolutely revolutionize their society, because their society is kind of premised upon the fact that you're probably not going to survive pregnancy, and that's the way biology works. But the Americans figured, no, we can fix that. We can improve the society, improve the fate of women in this species by making pregnancy less deadly.
Well, that reminds me of David Weber's Honor Harrington series. That is a thing where there are lots of planets, but one of the planets is one that has a lot of heavy metals on it, and it's been settled by basically, a lot of reviewers have called it Space Mormons, and so very patriarchal, and women are relegated to the home, but actually it turns out that all the women have to be basically chemical engineers to keep their homes clear of contaminants and, do the water filtration and food filtration and all of that to keep the food safe.
That's interesting. I was trying to look up maternal mortality rates to see if, because you mentioned it was like 1 in 3, and I was like, that's not good. Even in 1900, maternal mortality was in the United States was nowhere near that bad, not even close. But I did find out that infant mortality was also not that big in 1900, but has declined substantially, so that it went from 165 per thousand.
Per thousand is probably
something. I can't remember. Hold on, I'll find it again. Give me a second. Yeah, 165 per thousand infant mortality in 1900, and by 1997 it was 7 per thousand. So, go science.
Go science.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But still, it's like even like in this, even as late as the 70s, SIDS was a very feared thing. I mean, my parents were afraid I was going to die of SIDS. They told me flat out they thought I was not going to make it.
Sudden infant death syndrome, if I'm correct, is the
yeah. So that was in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So
I do like that this book puts so much attention on like not the shortened version of pregnancy. Like this could have been where just a couple of chapters was like I'm preggers, and then she gives birth and like moves on. The whole book is about it, right? I mean, she gives birth.
Yeah, she's dealing with the rigors of traveling while pregnant, which which is even rarer. It's like,
well, and horrible things are happening to her while she's pregnant, and so she's going through that. I mean, she's being chased, attacked, dealing with creatures, dealing with a very hostile environment where when both suns are up in the sky, you can die from heat stroke on this planet. This is not a happy planet. Yeah. It's weird. It's 1 year after Star Wars, which, of course, famously has a planet that has more than one sun.
2 suns.
Right? It's 76, right? Or is this also 77?
77.
It is 77. Yeah, my brain just died. And it's so interesting. You get these two in some ways, some very similar qualities in terms of, like, Tatooine is also horrible to live on because it's basically a giant desert world, and you have to have moisture farmers, and that's how you survive. And yet also this one just says, no, that's too easy. It's gotta be worse than Dune and the film that I've not actually seen yet because it probably just came out and I've already written this book. But yeah. Anyway, I think for me, just this book is a very uncomfortable book, but worth the experience if you can deal with that discomfort. There's definitely... I listened to the audiobook, and it must be very weird to read some of the scenes in this where, violence is occurring and people are saying the B word because they don't respect women and these kinds of things. But it's a book that I feel like is very much reversing a lot of what we expect of the genre as it's clearly riffing on, which is a thing I appreciate about the 60s and 70s in science fiction a lot, where there's like an awareness of where SF has been and to some degree still is, and is responding to that by sort of pulling it apart and showing why those things are not necessarily ideal, right? They're not the beautiful thing that we get. Like, it's not the movie we get with like Arnold, who's just like running around in a loincloth and is weirdly attractive, even though he's chopping people's head and screaming about the lamentations of the women. Right. There's a brutality to it that is inherently discomforting and necessarily so. And so when Elidis is going through these really brutal things, everything from, the kinds of violence done against her and threatened upon her to like the violence of the world she's existing in, I get this very clear sense that what Clayton is trying to get across is like, this is what a patriarchy unchecked is like for women. And it is a horrific, not fun place. And you don't want this if you care about these people.
I mean, consider what happens to Elidis' boyfriend.
He goes to Baskin Robbins.
It's not great for women either. I mean, it's not great for men either.
It's not, right? I think that's the thing.
Well, toxic masculinity.
It's toxic across the board.
Yeah,
exactly. And Clayton absolutely makes this point in the book. Like, you wouldn't like it either if you were a guy. I mean, bad enough women, but you're a guy. This is not going to be a pleasant society for you to live in.
It sort of harkens to some of the like in rhetoric we see today, where people are like talking about alpha males and like all these kinds of things. And it's like, in a world where we really think in those very stark terms, most of you can't be alpha males, like in the sense that you mean, because that necessitates that other people will be pushed down, and not everybody can be at the top. In your conception, I mean, it's not what actual alpha male, like they got it from wolves, but that's not how wolves work. So whatever.
No, they don't understand
in their conception, right, it is, if you like take that to its extreme, it is barbarism, but it is a barbarism where most men are encouraged to be violent and terrible, and most men can't succeed in that against other men.
Right, and it's so concentrated, at least at the beginning of the book, that the leader of Alidus's clan has the power to just arbitrarily decide he's going to pay 1,000 horses to buy a woman that he wants. And this is not a rich society. This is a society where, they talk about, not wasting cloth, it's a very poor society, and he has the power to just spend all of, probably at least a quarter of his group's resources on a thing that he wants just for his own selfish purposes. So, yeah, not a great.
Also, he's a billionaire. Got it.
He is. He's got the economic power, so he uses it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Trish, you wanted to mention some of the rest of the series. I mean, I think it's fair to say it's unlikely we're going to cover the whole series.
About this. I had questions about it.
The title of this, Diadem from the Stars, there's a diadem in the book. Yes. But there's a whole lot else going on in this book. And it's, if you don't know anything about the rest of the series, it's kind of like, okay, why did they call that this? I mean, okay, it does get across the idea that there is science fantasy going on here, because there's stuff from the stars and it's down here on a planet. So, okay, it kind of works as that. But, all we can tell about the diadem in this book is it's beautiful. It chimes when you put it on your head.
It sticks to your head.
And then it sinks into your head and disappears. And later on, it appears to have the ability to freeze time, and it also gives Alidus instant training in martial arts. That's basically
so it's the Matrix.
That's basically all we know about the diadem in this book. We find out a very little more in the next book, Lamarcos. And then we find out more in Ursud and continuing through the thing. And I will go ahead and spoil for the series. Quester's endgame, you can see on the cover. She finally took it off. But
so it took her 7 books to get it off?
Yes. And let me just show again
Turns out
the progression.
All she needed was some WD-40.
The progression of thickness in the books, then
God,
longer,
they all get bigger,
and then
bigger,
big books. So I will go ahead and spoil a bit about the diadem. It's actually technology that stores people in it. Or people's memories and personalities anyway. So there are several people stored in this diadem that have powers, who can kind of come out, and they can Jaeger Alidus's body before, she really starts talking with them and understanding, them. And they can also, there's one who can cast spells for the time freezing and other stuff. So it becomes very important through the series, but at the same time, Alidus is also developing her own psionic powers that she got from her father and the mountain people that they are from, and from her mother, who it turns out is from a secretive planet of people who are all redheads, who have their own. They have an eerie facility with technology, can make any machine you want. So yeah, the book gets there.
Does she ever get there?
What?
Does she ever get to her mother's planet?
You'll find out if you read the series.
Fair enough.
But,
nice.
I've already given away a lot about the diadem, but I thought that was important because things that are only hinted at in this book are explored throughout the series and afterward. And, honestly, if I just read Diadem from the Stars today without knowing anything after it, I probably would not continue with this series because there was a lot of unpleasant stuff in it. And not too much playing with ideas. The play with the ideas occurs throughout the series. And it's fun to read the series, but it's not Wheel of Time big, but it is a fairly big series. So I am glad I read it. I'm not sure how many people I would recommend read this entire series or read this, these 9 and also these 4 other books that are, based on other people in the series. I think it's great. It was kind of formative for me. And I really, really love the series as a whole. But gosh, I don't know who I'd recommend, just read Diadem from the Stars. I'd more say, if you have a summer of reading or something. Maybe think about this
science
series.
Fantasy. Yeah. Well, I didn't intend for us to talk about one of your formative heart series, but I'm glad that's what this turned out to accidentally be. That was just a bit of luck on our part, I guess, that we picked something that you read the whole entire series of and have a very strong opinions and love for. So thank you.
Thank you indeed, Trish. That's great.
Right, and thank you, Patreon, whose name I can't remember, who suggested this book.
It was somebody.
Sometimes our patrons are nice.
Our Patreons are nice.
Like 9 times out of 10. I mean,
it was Joe the Jovial.
Yeah, Joe the Jovial. Thank you very much, Joe the Jovial. Well, do we have any last thoughts about this, or you want to close it out?
I have said just about everything I need to say about this book. I probably should give some final thoughts since Trish did her stuff. Yeah, there was a lot of sexual assault. There was a lot of the pacing of this book was sometimes very herky-jerky for me. It's like rush, we go, and suddenly something happens. Wham! It's like what? And then move on real quick. It's like, huh? What?
Right.
So it seems like there's a lot of shift.
Keeps pushing past her boundaries and then having to take time to recover.
Yeah, it seems very, very weird gear shifting. But you both know me. I'm a sucker for science fantasy. The novel this kind of made me think of a bit as I was reading it was Kate Elliott's Geron, where we have a woman landing on a primitive planet and having to deal with basically nomadic cultures. And then we do have nomadic cultures in the back half of this book. So I'm thinking, oh, we're on Geron after all, aren't we? Are we going to get a marriage? Turns out no, but that the whole clash between a quote unquote primitive planet and a starfaring civilization, but the primitive planet knowing, oh yeah, there are people in the stars, you just don't trust them, they're bad. I mean, it's like you don't have to go through the whole explanation. Oh, there are people out in the stars. Oh, yeah, we know there are people in the stars. They just don't deal with them. They're evil, and you burn them. So I enjoyed the book, even given the sexual assault, and given that I think I'm getting the impression from Trish that the series goes better into ideas and whatnot as the series goes on. But I enjoyed my time on this hot two sun planet. Following Letus around as a pregnant main character running around a planet. It's like, this is new and different. I will take it. So,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe the Jovial, for suggesting this.
Indeed. This is a reminder, you can do that.
Yes, if you join our Patreon listeners, you can very easily suggest books for us to do on Mining the Genre Asteroid.
You can.
There's an opportunity right there. Right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are still figuring out what we're going to read for our next episode of Mining the Genre Asteroid. So please send questions, send suggestions to us about books you'd like us to cover that were written before 1980, and that includes way back to Mary Shelley or further back, or all through the history of science fiction. Particularly, we are focusing on forgotten authors or never were very famous authors. Do not send us recommendations to read Asimov or Bradbury or Heinlein.
Or,
We're not doing that
or even Le Guin.
or even Le Guin, not for
Even
mining
Le
the
Guin.
genre asteroid.
Yeah. No.
With that caveat, your suggestions are very welcome.
Absolutely. Well, I think we made a podcast, guys.
We made a podcast.
So, folks, thank you for coming. We appreciate you. You get 6 points.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, go and to the wonderful place you can go is skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions or email skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. If you send us a cool comment, we might even read it. Who knows? But by that, I mean like on the show. We will read it. It's just, whether or not we'll acknowledge it in public is a different question. Yeah, not like, no, send us an email. We may or may not read it. Who knows? Screw you. No, of course we will. We're Skiffy and Fanty on pretty much every social place you can think of. Blue Sky, Threads, Insta, TikTok is like, that's the base ones. Oh, and Mastodon. And you can find our newsletter, our Patreon, all of those good things at linktree/skiffyandfanty. That's linktr.ee/skiffyandfanty. Please go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty as well. Give us all your money.
And please give us some love by leaving us 5-star reviews on whatever your podcaster app of choice is.
Yes. Yeah. So
because
for
that
me,
helps people find us.
Yeah, that does help people find us, actually. Yeah. Does. No, don't point at me, Paul. Like, that's so... He looks down and points at us like we're being scolded.
I'm pointing at the watcher on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, God, this is terrifying. You can find me at ShaunDuke.net. Alphabet streams on Twitch. There's also where Skiffy and Fanty is. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 for me, and then it'll be Fridays at 7 starting in July. And then I have a Patreon, which is just /The Joy Factory, and also a Linktree, and I'm on like Threads, Blue Sky, and all of the places, and that's just the Linktree /Shaun Duke.
And you can find me, Trish M, on Blue Sky at P.E. Matson, on Mastodon at newsy.social /TrishEM, and on my blog at www.whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com, and recently on Journey Planet, issue 82.
And you can, from Nepal to New Zealand and beyond, I Can LG be found across the internet as Prince Justin, from book reviews to podcasting to streaming to sharing photography to helping edit Journey Planet episode 82, issue 82. I also have a Patreon. I am ubiquitous on the internet. Mm-hmm. Believe it.
Also, Paul meant Tibet.
Don't get me in trouble with Dave
Paul,
McCarty.
Aren't they? They're the same place. They're like literally on top of each other.
Oh, please. You know who's been to Tibet? And I have not been. Ursula Vernon's been to Tibet, not Nepal. I've been to Nepal, not Tibet.
It's Nepal.
Not the same.
Not
we
Tibet,
were in different countries.
It's Nepal, not Tibet. Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Is that an awkward ending?
Yeah, it'll be awkward because nobody responded to it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the support.
I only know that, I only know the refrain. I don't know any of the verses, so I couldn't really
Istanbul, not Constantinople now. Istanbul, not Constantinople now. It's Istanbul,
but not the Ritz.
Istanbul,
okay.
Even old New York.
All right, I will end our misery. And on that note, awkward ending, and see.